Hey gang, what's up? Welcome back here to another edition of Intuitive Angling, and hope you guys are having a good day out there today. And guys, today we are going to make the case about how we should not be keeping and eating bass in the lakes across the country. This is it's a touchy subject for some. It shouldn't be a touchy subject, but what's happened is I think a lot of people have they've got their mind locked into this frame that it's their right. And they have, if they buy a fishing license, it's their right to keep their limit of fish every day. And it's not like that anymore. We've got challenges in the sport that require a different way of thinking and a paradigm shift. So we're going to get into that and talk about it a little bit. So real quick, guys, I'd just like to invite everybody out there. I think you guys know that earlier this year I started my second YouTube channel, The Fishing Teacher with Randy Blockett. And if you guys are interested in subscribing to that, I'll put the link in the description. And it's a good way to support the new channel there, and it's really geared for more like beginning and intermediate anglers, so I'll put the link in the description there. Okay guys, I think the thumbnail on this video, if that picture sort of revolts you, it probably should. If you're a bass angler that has any type of a conservation edge to them, as far as the sustainability of our fisheries, most people have transcended that. And what I want to talk about is sort of like the perception and the way that people used to think about our fisheries and our resource in the past versus the way the reality is now. And that reality, it's going to force us to make a change in the way that we perceive what our so-called rights are as far as keeping fish or not, because the fishing pressure, guys, is just adding up. And here's what the deal is. It's like, let's talk a little bit about the state conservation departments and fishing games and that type of stuff. For the most part, guys, one of the things that I have found, I've spent more days on the water and more time around fish than most any fisheries biologist has, or people that work for the fishing game department. So I have my own viewpoint on fisheries management that sort of butts heads, with a lot of the way that I see our fisheries being managed out there. I mean, I had my own 40-acre lake for over 15 years, and I managed that thing, pretty much against the recommendations of the Department of Conservation. And I had a exemplary fishery, doing it my own way. So in my opinion on this, is what the deal is I think one of the biggest myths in fishing is the fact that bass fishermen are necessary, or fishermen in general are necessary for keeping the populations in balance, and that you've got to harvest bass or they're going to get stunted and they're going to overpopulate a lake. Guys, I think that's the biggest myth that we have in fisheries management right there. Any lake across the country, the fish are going to do fine without fishermen thinking they've got to intervene and cull out some of the fish. That is not true. The only thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that they have sustainable habitat and forage. If you've got sustainable habitat and forage, the natural balance and the natural cycle of the lake will support itself. They don't need any interference with us. Just different types of natural mortality, whether it be from predators like birds, like ospreys and cormorants, otters, that type of stuff, in correlation with just the regular cycle of life in the lake. They don't need fishermen to manage it. I think that is a propaganda tool that justifies people for keeping and catching bass out there. And what we have, our situation, is we have gotten so much more fishing pressure on our lakes today, and we have gotten so much better at catching fish out there that we're putting a increasing amount of pressure on our lakes across the country that are unsustainable, given the fact that there's a finite number of fish out there. And on top of that, you have different challenges as far as terms of the future of the fishery, in terms of water quality issues, all the pollution issues that we have, the nutrient overloads that are causing problems, climate change and how that's disrupting the entire cycle. And make no mistake about it, guys, climate change is going to affect the future of bass fishing in terms of the overall life cycle from the bottom up, when you start having seasonal fluctuations that never existed before. We'll do a video on that at some point. So there's a lot of stuff stacked against it. Now, what we sort of have to do is, I think that we sort of have to begin teaching the fishing public. And this comes from, a lot of this comes from, it's got to come from the conservation departments, because we've got to start encouraging people to catch and release fish. Not just bass, but a lot of different type of fish. Guys, there's a lake north of where I live here in Missouri called Stockton Lake, and it's sort of known as a good crappie lake. And I've crappie fished Stockton Lake since the 1970s. And guys, the amount of crappie pressure on that lake with guys that have live scope and forward-facing sonar, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's going to destroy that lake. I mean, guys are going out and catching their limit in just a matter of 20 or 30 minutes, almost any day that they want to go out there. And you can't tell me that over the long term that doesn't have some type of effect on the system, because once you start depleting the crappie population, which is it's part of the cycle of a lake, you start affecting other species as well. And it's the same with the bass. It's like, we have one of the biggest, one of the best things that ever happened to bass fishing in the history of fishing was when Ray Scott started the whole catch and release movement back in the early 70s. Up into that, people didn't release fish. I mean, I remember, like, my dad and friends, when you caught fish, you ate them. People didn't turn them back. And Ray Scott sort of changed that mentality, and it's caught on to a large degree, but it hasn't caught on everywhere, because make no mistake about it, guys, and I see this all the time, there are a ton of dudes that still put the knife to them. And there's a ton of guys that are good fishermen that put the knife to them. There's a ton of guys that are live scopers that put a knife to them. And some guys say, well, I'm going to keep all the spotted bass I want to because there's too many of them. That's not the case either. The spotted bass are no different than the largemouth. The problem with that is as we have more anglers that get into the sport, and those anglers, the base level skill level of the anglers that get in, that basically are meat eaters, they're getting better and better and better. I mean, they're live scoping, they're going out at night and catching them. I've had run-ins with them a bunch of times. I mean, anytime that I see some guy cleaning a big bass, I've got to say something, at least to, get my point out there. And most of them out there that I've talked to or had run-ins when, they basically think it's almost like they do it on purpose. It's like the more somebody pushes back against them, the more that they keep them. And it's almost like they think if they spend $15 a year on the fishing license, that entitles them to keep anything they catch. And if they go out and spend $50 on gas and they've got a boat and they've got tackle, it's like, by God, they're going to bring some fish home and have some fish to eat. They're not going to throw them back in the lake. And the problem you have is as more and more people develop this mentality, on top of the increasing amount of delayed mortality due to bass fishing tournaments, it's going to devastate our fisheries. So guys, you've got these three negatives coming at bass fishing from a lot of different directions. You have the meat eaters, which, there's no chance of catch and release with that. You have the tournament anglers that kill a ton of bass through delayed mortality. And then you have the technology acceleration that is allowing the meat hunters and the tournament anglers to catch more and more bass. And as a result, you have more bass killed by delayed mortality and more bass that go underneath the knife. So the thing that we have to do with this, guys, it's all about education, and it's about awareness, and it starts from the state conservation departments. One of the things that I don't agree with on the state conservation departments, for the most part, is they see bass and fish as a resource to be consumed by the general public. They don't see it beyond much of that. So their entire agenda that they have, from what I have seen, is to make sure that there's fish out there that people can keep and catch. It doesn't seem like they put the effort into the habitat management and the stocking and the, increasing the forage for the fish as they do as trying to manage a fishery through, taking fish out of it. And fishing's tougher than it ever has been, guys. I mean, and that's, just part of what we're going to see here. But until the conservation departments and the agencies that basically are the voice of the anglers start coming out and encouraging anglers to catch and release 100% of their catch, this is going to get worse, guys. And like I said, I do not believe the fact that we have to be part of this entire process to manage a lake to keep the fish in check. I don't believe that. I mean, and one of the ways I don't believe that is my observations through big lakes across the country that I fished, and the lakes that have more or less fishing pressure, and managing my own 40-acre lake for years, is sort of on a microcosm level out there. So anyway, I would just encourage everybody to throw them back, man. It's like, a bass is it's such an honor, and it's such a thrill to catch a bass. And it's really the best part of catching our bass for me is turning it back in the water and watching that bass swim off, until we start teaching people that this is what they need to be focused on, instead of just like, what's here for me here and now. I'm going to keep my 5 fish limit. I'm going to clean these limit of spotted bass out. If you have that mentality, you sort of have this mentality that is sort of self-centered to a large degree. And we have to start thinking about our future generations more. And fisheries management, if you start looking at fisheries management from like a harvesting standpoint, I just think that's a recipe for disaster in light of the other pressure we have on the fish, like the delayed mortality and increasing electronic technology. But anyway, there's got to be a change, guys. Until there's a change in the way that we think about this and the way that we perceive it, I think the majority of the bass anglers out there are on board with what I'm saying here. Sure, there's some out there that are listening to that. It's like, Randy, you just need to keep your mouth shut. If I want to keep bass I catch, that's my business. That's none of your business. I don't want nobody telling me what to do. And if I want to keep a limit of spotted bass, I'm going to do it. I mean, there's going to be that group out there that just don't really understand or don't get what I'm trying to convey here in the big picture and over the long term. And one of the things you guys hear me talk about here on the channel a lot, guys, is the sustainability of the fisheries for the long term, because it's not about you here and now. It's like you have got to transcend the fact that your rights in some way are being violated if somebody tells you what to do or what not to do in terms of keeping and catching fish. We have got to have this shift where we start thinking future generations down the road based upon what our actions are doing. And it's not, guys, it's not 1975 anymore. The way that we perceive the fisheries in this country in 1975 and during the 80s, it's not the reality of the situation anymore. And I think even a lot of the conservation department people get sucked into that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the deal, guys. Like I said, if you're going to put any energy, and if you're concerned about the future of fisheries, and you think that people have to, take them out of the lake to manage the fishery, start putting your efforts more into habitat, stocking programs, increased food forage. I spent a ton of time on my 40-acre lake. I was always putting new habitat in. I was putting hard habitat, shallow aquatic vegetation. I made sure my bluegill populations were huge, and didn't take any fish out of that lake. And it was always awesome. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll talk later. See you.